Happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. I'm Sheree Burton, and this is a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. I think you're going to love today's episode as Alithia Gallegos and I dive deep into understanding how to separate truth from tradition. They are not mutually exclusive. You can find truth in tradition and tradition in truth. However, sometimes the lines can be a little blurred. Coming into 4th of July and here in the US, just celebrating freedom and what that means. And I think what's triggering everyone right now is just inciting this like wanting to be free, wanting to find truth, anger for the injustices of the past, looking at how we can dissemble institutions and structures and ideologies that don't allow for inclusivity and freedom for the human soul. I'm so grateful for my own freedoms that are hard fought, as I'm sure most of you are looking at your lives going, okay, now like what can I live in gratitude for and what can I fight for? And how can I experience truth in my own being and allow others to do the same and have compassion for everyone? So Alithia Gallegos is a master business strategist. She's led marketing and legal departments for a multi-million-dollar tech startup, during which she negotiated multiple deals with partners and vendors that helped move the company forward. She's the CEO of Sonoma JV Partners and offers business owners a path to increase their sales and profits without increasing their overhead through the power of strategic partnering. And that's actually how I met her. We formed an alliance and a strategic, I guess you could say, multiple partnership around a side business venture that we're both associated with. And I was just really struck with her easy, grounded, very level-headed and spiritual approach to doing business. She hosts the Life and Business Mastery podcast. So her heart focus, and I think this is where she and I are aligned, is on freedom, philanthropy, and she has a special interest in freeing children from sex trafficking, which she will share a story in our discussion about someone she knew who was involved in that and escaped. Alithia, I'm so grateful that you're joining us today. It just feels so divinely aligned that we get to connect at this time based on our like how the universe puts together. I think it's a miracle.
Yes, I love miracles. I love divine appointments. I would definitely say this conversation is a divine appointment from the recent talk that we had and those kind of things. So I'm so looking forward to this.
Yay. Well, let's just get right in. I know where you and I have connected. I think we connected in more of a business setting, semi-mastermind type of group. It's just cool how we found each other. And I was instantly struck with your presence. I first met you through video because you did a video introduction to our group. And I was like, wow, there's something really powerful and special about her. And of course, you're just stunning and beautiful, but it was just your presence that drew me in. And it was just cool that we got to have that, you and I had a very, very long conversation and figured out we had a lot in common. But I guess maybe bring us to what got you to the space where you and I share this value of freedom?
Yes.
And especially as we head into like July 4th and maybe this podcast episode will air right around that time, but actually it's airing this Wednesday. So it's going to air the week before July 4th, but freedom, let's start about like parsing out what that means to you personally. And I'll kind of put my slant into it. And then we'll just talk a little bit about your journey that got you to value this so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Freedom, it just means so many different things to everybody, right? Everybody has a different version of freedom. And I think for me, coming through the different things that I've come through, it's just probably my biggest value is freedom. Mm-hmm. And, there's all kinds of dynamics around that and what that looks like. But I think the experience of the opposite of freedom has really made me aware of freedom in all aspects of my life, like where I want to experience more freedom, share more freedom in the various different facets of that. And I think that comes back to, some of the things that I've gone through and journeyed through to get to this point.
So what is the opposite of freedom?
Feeling trapped, I would say. Yeah, feeling trapped.
I think of the word slavery. Um,
Yes.
and we can become enslaved, I think, in so many different ways. And I think the conversation of Black Lives Matter, I think, is bringing it up for a lot of people. Of course, people who are Black have a different wound and trauma around that with their ancestry. I mean, human slavery is alive and well on our planet right now. I know that's something that you're very passionate about as well, is helping to end human slavery. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Like one of the things that feels the most oppressive for me is children, women and children that have been sex trafficked. And
Mhm.
so when I think of freedom, that feels like the opposite on so many levels, right? That we could think of a human being as just a commodity to be used and abused and profited from, where their soul and who they are, it has no bearing in the situation, and where there's actual pleasure taken from the very act of abuse,
Mm.
and where my needs outweigh their needs, right? Like it's just such an atrocity that
Yeah.
that needs to be stopped, right? And yeah, so it that to me that's like the opposite of freedom.
Yeah. I can't remember the statistic. Maybe you can help me, but Operation Underground Railroad, which actually I've done a little bit of uh, fundraising, and I've been involved in it to a degree for probably about the last 4 or 5 years. And because Timothy Ballard lives in my area, and so I've gotten to be part of some of the movement and around ending human sex trafficking. But yeah, I can't remember. Do you know the statistic of how many people are currently enslaved
I
in human
don't, but
slavery? It's
it's
it's way up there. It's in the millions.
absolutely, it's in the millions. It's so, yeah, it's in the millions. It's astonishing. Yeah. And when I started to learn that it's like because we can think of countries like Cambodia or different countries like that across the world, right? But it's in our backyard. Like it's there's organizations. There's I know one of my former bosses, son's really good friend was almost trafficked, and just the illusion of like this, and the extent that they go to in order to trap their victims. Like they will marry them, they will date them for years, they will do a lot of things besides
Wow.
just snatching. Yeah, so this particular situation was this was a high school girl in Plano, Texas. And so this is a very prominent, this was another thing that was surprising. It was a very prominent, affluent community, well-educated community. And it's also a very prominent place for them to find girls, for them to find people to traffic. And this young lady, in high school, great student, she started dating this older man, not too much older, but out of school, obviously. And she started to change, right? So she started to see her friends less. She started to change her beliefs. She started to isolate herself from her family that she was once very close with. And this progressed for months. And it got to the point where she was not seeing her friends at all. She was barely talking to her family. She was very isolated, spending a lot of time with this gentleman. And they had plans to get married, and she was going to move to his country. And she had told one person. And I was so grateful. And this comes back to freedom and courage and the correlation. She told one person, which was a good friend of hers, that she was going to get married, essentially elope, and then move to this country with this man that she'd fallen in love with. And that friend was so scared, but that friend had the courage to call her father, the girl's father, and tell him what was going on. And so they actually, I forget exactly how it worked out, but they took her into the police station, and the police were talking to her about this man that she was about to marry. And she was in complete denial, right? She was fully in love. She thought she was going to start her life, and nobody here understood. Nobody here knew what she felt in her heart and those kind of things. And so they started sharing things about this man and his history and his record and the kind of things that she could be stepping into, which is, there's the whole sex trafficking aspect of this, but there's also horrific things like organs, the black market for organs, human organs, and different things like that. So there was just, and she was literally within days from taking that flight out of the country. And so it took quite a while, but being at the police station and seeing all this evidence of the things that this man had done, she finally was able to participate with the police officers, and I think able to have a happy ending. And now her father and her actually wrote a book together, and they actually appear on, TV shows, news, and stuff like that to educate, because this is the last thing that people think of, right? A good, affluent, school in North America, and how much time they invest, right? Because it's profitable for them, right? There's so many things that can lead to that entrapment in the beginning, right? Like, why was she even open to that kind of a conversation? And it's very insidious, being trapped, getting into that process of getting into an abusive relationship, or getting trapped into a job that is toxic, or any kind of thing that your freedom is moment by moment being chipped away. It can be very insidious. And then all of a sudden you look up one day and you go, oh my gosh, how did I get here? Like, I thought my life was going to be so much different. Yeah.
Right. I think about that too, metaphorically, like even on the spirit level, if you really understand like addiction, I've had loved ones pass through addiction. And I think what I learned, even as I worked in the clinical setting, I worked as a family education director at a recovery center and drug and alcohol addiction recovery center. And I would educate this is years ago, but I would educate the families on the addiction cycle and how to support your loved one without enabling, and how to stand in a space of basically like tough love, but genuine love. And so interesting to me what I learned there. I came in thinking, oh, I'm the teacher and whatever. But what I realized is that we're all addicted to something. Sometimes it's negative thinking. Sometimes, it could be so many behavioral traits. It could be so many patterns that we just developed, from our environment or through our ancestral lines. But when I think about, obviously like the most pronounced is human slavery, like people use, like you said, using another human for their own purposes without any thought of the sanctity of their life or the holy being they are. And I think why, we put ourselves in chains in a lot of ways, right? So for your life, what made you so passionate about this? And you'd referenced that you'd passed through some things that were difficult. You don't have to divulge too much, but I've never interviewed anyone that didn't pass through hell if they're a strong.
Exactly. I think everybody has, right?
Yeah.
You don't get to this part in your life without having gone through some things, right? And I think most people had a rough childhood in one respect or another, and I would be in that category in certain areas. But in other areas, I know that I was loved growing up by both parents. I was given that gift of being fully loved as a child. And I still know that to this day. And I know that not every child has that. So I know that I'm very blessed in that respect. And, one of like many things have been the topic of freedom have come up in many areas and many traumas in my life. But one of them in particular was when I was just leaving high school. I was, I had low self-esteem, very low self-esteem. Self-worth was almost non-existent. And off I went to college, and I was dating a guy at the time, and I just didn't have that inner wisdom of knowing how amazing and precious and valuable I was. And so I made some very poor choices. And I ended up marrying this man, and we had an extremely toxic marriage, like a very toxic marriage. I wasn't healthy, myself, right? I didn't have that strength. I didn't have that self-esteem. I was making poor choices. And he had a lot of things that he was dealing with as well. And so you put those two together and it gets a little explosive. And so it was very toxic. And I had made these vows and I was sitting there like crying and going, what am I going to do? Right? This is not the life that I want. I can't see myself living this day in, day out for the rest of my life. What am I going to do? And so I learned at a very young age, because I got married very young. I learned at a very young age, or I guess I made a decision at a very young age that the only thing that I have control over is me. Mm-hmm. I don't have control over anybody else. And if anything is going to happen, I need to be the one to take these steps. And so I dove into personal development at age 19, and I devoured all kinds of books on, myself, on thinking, on mindset, on relationships. And I start to understand that as I change as a person, people change around me. As I change as a person, my situation around me changes. And that was really fascinating to me. It took me many years of going through that. And I'm still, in that process of self-discovery, still in that process of self-healing, still in that process of, becoming the best version that I can be. But that was like the initial catalyst of just that extreme toxicity in a relationship that is supposed to bring, the society and that in our minds, we're like, this is supposed to be a relationship filled with love and support. And, you stand together, united and stronger together to move forward and make these beautiful, wonderful things in the world. And it was the opposite. It was the biggest source of just feeling trapped and just feeling unloved, like toxic love. Like it's just like that push and pull of, because there's other women involved, there's all kinds of things. And so you start to question your desirability, you start to question all kinds of things. And so it was really like the starting grounds of my inner work, the starting grounds of recognizing that there's so much that I can do, right, to create this life and to contribute to this life. So that's where it really all began for me.
And then you were always sort of drawn to business, right? It seems like because you've had a lot of success as a businesswoman. And I just wanted to, before we get into that, like when you talk about it's usually a relationship that has to teach us what we need to learn. And it's usually, I don't know, there's this book called Sacred Contracts. It's an older book by Carolyn Myss, I think is her name. And she talks about how even our quote unquote enemies, or the people who are perpetrators against us or who betray us, or someone who brings pain into our world, they actually kind of do us a service in a roundabout way. That's not to exonerate them from their actions against us. However, it really galvanizes us to look deep inside and find our own inner strength. And I actually interviewed this girl named Brielle, and she was Warren Jeff's 65th wife on this podcast. And it was just a phenomenal and fascinating glimpse into how and I actually think we named the episode The Courage to Leave.
Yeah.
And just how she was groomed her entire life in this cult to give her, and as all women were in that cult, to be honest, to prepare to have grace the presence of, this prophet, false prophet. She didn't even know she was married. She was literally taken to a room and kind of like in the middle of the night when she was 18, and Warren Jeffs was on the other side of the altar. She had no idea that that was going to happen. And so anyway, that just brought up when you said, when you were talking about, there is this component to, at some point, because her waking up was like seeing her younger sister being groomed for the same thing at age 12.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, that was the catalyst for her. It was like, no, this is not okay. Like, I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
And I got to take her with me. And for you, so you said that you dove into personal development books, but was there just a catalyst or a moment, or maybe it was a series of those moments where you were like, this is not okay.
It's
I
not
don't want to
okay.
live like this.
Not okay. Yeah. I mean, I started doing the personal development early, and I was married for 8 years in my former marriage. And, many, like I just was making poor choices. I was allowing things that were against who I was and my values. And that's like the biggest screaming red flag. But they're like, and I had made these vows to be married for better or for worse. We were in the for worse part. And again, like just nothing against him or me. It takes two, right? It takes two to perpetuate that toxicity. It takes two to be in that dance of a relationship and how that unfolds. And so like, I am just as much a participant in all of that, as he was. Right. But I was starting to go through all of this personal development. I was starting to explore my heart and wanting to get out of this mess, and making great progress in certain areas and stuff like that. But just the core of our relationship was just still very toxic. And so I made these vows of for better, for worse. We were in the for worse part, and you talk about addictions. It's my belief that my former husband had addictions in relationships with others, and so there was other women involved and things like that. And one of the hard moments for me, I mean, many hard moments, one of the hard moments for me where I think it was more like that turning point. I'm like, okay, we need to start moving forward. But there was one time when he was leaving to go spend some time with someone else. And I thought, you know what? I am just going to put it all on the line. I'm just going to put it all on the line. I'm just going to really make that plea, that heart plea of like, let's turn this around, that kind of thing. And I actually got down on my knees and I begged him not to go. And he walked out the door. And when that closed behind him, that was just a hard moment. And that wasn't the decision moment for me, but that was like the beginning of the enough is enough. Like I need to start to make some big changes, and I can't wait for him to be the one to make those changes for me. Right? It's for my heart, for my life, and for what I'm going to move forward in.
Wow, yeah, it's that visual that you gave. That's tough.
Yeah.
Especially getting on your knees. It's such an act of surrender and vulnerability, and to have somebody just turn and go is,
yeah. It's very crushing. And for me, like I needed to know that I did absolutely everything, and I did everything and more than everything than I should have. And that gave me a lot of peace, that I didn't walk away questioning, could I have done something else? Like I walked away going, I did a little too much, but it gave me such peace. And throughout that process, a really beautiful gift was like, God gave me such grace towards him. And I mean, like I said, we were both not the healthiest we could have been, right? Emotionally and relationally and those kind of things. And I just had such grace towards him, like no ill will, no nothing, like just wishing him the absolute best as we worked through that process and that untangling of our lives together and stuff like that. But I was amazed at just the level of peace and grace that I had towards our relationship and towards him.
You're making me think about as we're talking about freedom and as you brought in grace, I've heard it said that you can't truly experience freedom until you feel grace. There's a force or a flow, I should say, not a force, but it's a power. Grace has a power. And, even with you being on your knees, like that's an act of surrender that leads to an awakening. I just wanted to offer that because if that was a moment in time where you were willing to do whatever it took, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes we don't always do that for ourselves, and when we awaken to the power is in us, to receive and give love in healthy ways, that it changes everything. So grace for me is just opening up and allowing whatever needs to move through me, that I'm not in charge of it anymore, and
Yeah.
just release the, like, I don't know, when we're talking about being enslaved and in chains, for me, I just think about like the cartoons where you have the wristbands of the chains and you just break them open.
That's a
And
great
it's like,
visual.
yeah, like, yeah, it's the, no, it's like kind of like the line in the sand, and that no way, like the warrior in me, like, nope, no.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of my life, I outsourced someone else to validate. Like I outsourced that power to other people to try to give it to me through books or relationships or leaders or teachers, whatever. And it
Mhm.
was like, wait a minute. If I'm the common denominator here, like, and I'm the only one that like lives and breathes in my own skin. I walk with me all the time. So how do I access that divine flow to be with me all of the time, so that I'm not always pining for it in all these other places?
Yes. Yeah.
And when you and I talked before we had our epic discussion, which, hey, if we would have recorded that, like,
That would have been something else.
that would have been. Um, you said a phrase to me, and you said, and it was almost like the Spirit landed in you, and God spoke through you to give me a message, which I was really humbled by and grateful for. And you said a phrase, strong tower. You said the phrase strong tower, and that's from scripture, right?
Hmm. Yes.
I don't know where, but, and you're like, I hardly ever say that. And I was like, well, when you said it, you gave me the chills, because Magdala, Mary Magdalene, Magdala means strong tower.
Mm.
Um, and she is my epic archetypal. Well, I know she's a true historical figure, but like I look to her as what I want to embody. And so it was almost like a second witness for me when you said that phrase, because I was like, oh, because you're kind of helping me take up more courage in a couple of my life domains. Um, and breaking those old traditions is not easy. For me, it was a
Yes.
form of slavery. I mean, for me,
Yeah.
I felt, and I'm still working through it, like, how do I separate tradition from truth?
Yeah. Great question. And for the strong tower, I've never referenced a person besides, I've only used that for God, so that was the first time I've ever referenced a person, but that was very personal for you. And it was intentional for that conversation. And the tradition versus truth is something that, I get to explore. I think all of us get to explore if we're open to it. But for me, for my relationship with God, like, I mean, it's it's so intimate, it's so tender, it's so loving. And there's so many different facets and dynamics. Like even with my husband, my husband and I are husband and wife. We are best friends. We are business partners. We are, workout partners. There's different types of relationship within that single relationship. And that's the same thing that I have with God. There's different aspects of how we get to interact together, how we get to have conversations together, how I get to learn and grow and evolve, what I get invited into, how I get to show up as like the living, breathing heartbeat of God for other people, and what all of that looks like. And I think like the risk of being too heavy on tradition is that you miss the intimacy. Like, how would it feel like if you had a dictionary on your husband and you knew every single nuance of your husband, but you never had an intimate conversation? You never held
Right.
hands on a walk together. Like, those are the kind of things we can do with God. And we miss out on all of that when we just make it all about tradition.
Yeah, we miss the direct experience.
Yeah.
There's and I think the last probably 5 or 6 years of my life, I've really been studying some Gnostic, like the old feminine mystics, like Teresa of Avila and Julian of Norwich and Hildegard, and just these beautiful women saints, if you will, who and Joan of Arc, who lived in a time where it was frowned upon to even pray without an intermediary there, like a priest or an
Mhm.
ecclesiastical leader. And so these beautiful, courageous women would do it anyway. And then they
Yes.
would write. And so we have some of their writings, which I feel like are complete scripture. But also these Gnostic mystics and whatever, and to me, mysticism isn't supernatural term. It's when you really study mysticism, it just means direct experience with the beloved. It means people who want to have not just be led somewhere or read about something or study it. They want to have a union with the divine. They want to have a union with God. And for me, I can't explain why, but I have always just been so drawn to understand the feminine face of God. I mean, if you could look at the books on my shelves, plural, it's all trying to find that. And I'm like, why is it so important to me and maybe not so important to others? And I just feel that sort of a little nudge um, of like, go, like it's you, it's okay. And I don't have to wait for someone to tell me that that's okay. It's where I feel called is to study the divine feminine. And I am starting to feel that again, that's goes back to Mary Magdalene because she's one of the few heroines we have in the scriptures that, well, first, she was the first one at the resurrection. She was the first person to see the risen Christ. And there's a lot of other inferences with her gospel and other things that were found in ancient Egypt or, buried during the time of like around 300 AD. So anyway, there's all that. But coming back to just me personally, trying to differentiate between what's been handed to me through tradition and I mean all the way back thousands of years to now people saying this is the way and it's this way and this is the way it's always been done and it's like part of me going well okay um there's a lot of ways to do something and I feel like I need to find my truth in this.
Yes, it's such a, I mean, it's so, this is an area where oppression and control and traditions can come in. Like I'm Christian and I have such freedom in that. I have such freedom in that. And I've been able to foster this intimate, beautiful relationship that just keeps expanding and keeps getting more intricate and more just tender. Um, there's, I think there's always been this desire to put a limit on, put a limit on us, put a limit on God, and put us in a box, make it structured, make it clean and neat and clear, right? But it's not like it's what one day is beautiful in the path forward, the next day in some respects you apply it differently, right? Like you don't always do the same thing. There's principles, there's guidance and those kind of things, but it's very free flowing. And so I think because of what you came through and because of the very strong traditions from what you came through, and the very strong prominent male voice in that,
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole other beautiful, like there's a reason why there's man and woman. Women bring a whole other beautiful essence and ability to interact with the world and create with the world in a manner that is so completely different than men. Like I was just watching something last night from I forget what it was, but there was the men are from Mars, women are from Venus.
Yeah. John Gray.
John Gray, exactly. And I mean, he just gave a beautiful voice to the distinctions between men and women. Like, we're created differently and we express differently and we move through this world differently. And there's a whole side of God, because we're a reflection of God, right? So there's a whole side of God and the reflection of his heart that is expressed through us, right? That maybe has not been explored as much as other things. So I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And for any of the listeners who need clarification on the traditions that we're talking about, for me personally, I live in Utah. It's very predominantly Mormon, or Latter-day Saint, as they like to be called now. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And my ancestors settled here. I've got a lot of ties to this area and to this faith. And I think many people, and I wouldn't just say this is true for within Mormonism, but I think it's happening all over, is that people are really examining and becoming aware of teachings or traditions that really don't always bear the healthiest outcomes. I'm especially right now. I mean, a lot of churches and nations really have been founded on slavery. Coming back to what we originally started with. I know right now here in my community, Brigham Young is there's Brigham Young University, and he's actually the man who founded this valley. And it was, kind of barreling over some of the Native Americans who were already settled here, as well as some very quite white supremacist theology and teachings, and which the church now doesn't espouse, but that's still the foundation upon which this valley was settled, and also very early tenets of the faith. Like, that was the truth then. That's just what everyone thought then. Blacks were meant to be slaves, and there was even some talk of blacks will be slaves in heaven because they aren't as righteous and they aren't as valiant of souls. And some of that has still been perpetuated in the consciousness. And so we get to take all of that apart and look at it and go, wait a minute, did I inadvertently swim in the soup of that theology and not know it, even though it wasn't actually taught, but it's somewhere there in the consciousness? And I just didn't really examine this fully. I didn't really climb into this. They actually just painted some people just went onto the campus, because the campus isn't open right now because of COVID, and painted racist in in really red paint on his statue in the middle of campus. And I don't agree with that. However, it's where people are. There's a lot of, hey, let's really look at this. Let's maybe say a little bit more than, oh, that's just what he thought then. That's not what God really thinks. But if you're saying you're speaking for God and you said that, then we need to look at the harm and the trauma that's been created around that. And I'm not attacking him personally, other than to just say, this is where we are as a collective right now. We are looking at everything. All of the structures are going to start to crumble until we can actually get to the heart of the truth versus the tradition.
Yeah. It's such an important thing for us to address and to turn our eyes towards and our hearts towards, and to start to go, okay, well, what does this solution look like? And you were very gracious in your exploration of this. And I commend you for that. I can tell that you have a lot of love for people that are still, in this world, and as you're exploring through this. So I commend you for how sensitive you are towards this. One thing that comes up for me is that the actions, first thing that comes up for me is I love Canada. I'm Canadian. I love Canada. Canadians are known to the world for being very kind, very friendly. They joke about us because we're so
Never
friendly.
Met a Canadian I didn't like.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And I'm in that camp. And we are, and yet we did the same things. In Canada, we settled Canada, and we took advantage of the Aboriginals. We put them in reserves, and we tried to take away their language. We tried to take away their culture, and yet that doesn't make Canadians bad or wrong, right? Like there's just aspects of our journey that is just really heartbreaking, really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And this is that time when we get to come around and look at that. And so and there was seasons of the world where slavery for the Black and for others were very common and very acceptable. It's hard for us to wrap our head around that being acceptable. But 100 years from now, people are going to be looking at us and going, "Oh my gosh, how could you have ever lived the way you were?" Right? Because there's going to be more layers of us opening up to, "Oh, you know what? Why did we ever allow that?"
There's an unveiling that's happening right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And all of the distortion is coming to light.
There is a lot. And so what I am very mindful of is that I don't want to match the same energy of what it created the problem.
Yeah.
I'm of the camp, of those that put their energy into the solution and into the promise and into that beautiful future and what that would look like. I don't know what that would look like right now. I have a heart of what I'd hope that would look like, and how to move forward in that. I'm definitely not perfect in how to do these things, but that's where my heart goes is, I've made horrific mistakes in my life. I have hurt many people, and yet I have also been a huge source of blessing and love and peace and possibility. Each of us have that within us. And when you gather a bunch of people together that are hurt and that are acting out of their hurt, it can be very dangerous.
Yes.
And I think it's so important for us to get back to the heart, because out of the heart flows the issues of life. Like out of our heart, the health of our heart, showing up to these situations with anger and bitterness and rage, it's not going to produce a good outcome. But there's an aspect of righteous anger that you need enough energy to make positive change. But I'm very mindful of
I'm super feisty about, I don't know if I completely say yes, I'm a feminist, but I probably am, but I don't define it the same way maybe everyone else would. But I'm very feisty about giving women a voice, and allowing for a woman to exercise spiritual gifts in patriarchy, and to have equal authority. That is something that I have righteous anger around.
Yeah.
And there's love there, though. I mean, I'm also reminded of, again, and you and I talked about this before, Jesus, when he threw over the money changers in front of the temple, like I can get fierce with that, but I'm not sure like how you can't stay sustained in that energy. You have to come back to the love. And for me, it's that the truth will set you free. The truth always wins. Love always wins. So when we're talking about this unveiling that's happening, it's because we're getting closer to the truth. We're seeing things as they are, which is super healthy. As I look at some of the rioting, and I kind of had to like just not look at the TV for a while or get off social media, because it was just like, oh, I don't know how to feel right now. Like, I feel guilty. I'm sad. I have remorse. I'm appalled. I'm devastated. I'm, all these emotions around how I show up, in this space, with Black Lives Matter and people that I've met in my journey of many nations and ethnicities, and how I can see that there has been this oppression, and for women, there's been an oppression. So anyway, I am a white woman living in America in a very predominantly white community.
Yes.
So I have a completely, and I say I didn't choose it, but I'm sure my soul chose it for a reason, a very predominantly patriarchal, religious community where women are waking up and also trying to honor, where's my space here? And how do I stay aligned in integrity? And you had actually given me a beautiful phrase too that I wrote down because I took notes when we talked last time.
Yeah.
And you said you were born for such a time as this. And that's Queen Esther, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I was like, oh, stop. You're just like, because I don't know. I think we need another person to come in and be like, it's okay. Like to speak truth to what we're
What
like,
you're
am I
doing.
being deceived? Am I in darkness? Am I under the throes of the evil one? Or is this what I've been called to
To step
do?
into. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, no other person can give that. That's your soul journey and that's your conversation with God. But talking it through can really help, right? Talking it through can really help. And I do feel like there's just an atmosphere of chaos and fear and confusion and division. But it's us. We get to be the ones to bring our essence into this whole world, right? Like I get to come in and share this aspect of peace and love and still navigate through these waters, right? I don't have to feed into the chaos. I don't have to feed into the fear. I don't have to participate in that aspect of it, but then navigating the waters of like showing up in my best, highest self and exploring those conversations, exploring what, you were created for such a time as this. And we all were. That's why we're here right now. Like
that's why
there
we're all
is
here.
no one better suited to be here right now than you, because you're here right now. You were chosen to be on this earth right now as all of this is unfolding and our kids are looking at us going, what's going on, right? Like, how am I supposed to navigate this in my world, right? And they're looking to us to be their leaders and to be their example and to show them what's possible of how to rise up with courage in times like this. So yeah, absolutely.
And you said something beautiful earlier in the discussion about your relationship with God being very, very expansive, yet also very tender. And I think that's very profound because when we put our spirituality in a box with a set of expectations and rules, we limit God and how he or she can move through us and work with us and use us, if you will, to lift everything else to make this world better. If we see, for me, that's the difference I feel when I'm studying and exploring where my soul wants to take me. It feels very open and expansive. And if I have to sit in a setting where I'm only allowed to explore so far, a little part of me is going to rebel and be like, well, wait, you know, so anyway, and I want to just say that the tender part of it is the devotion, the devotional practices. Is there anything that you want to share with our listeners as we kind of wrap up around maybe a peek into your spiritual practice or how, because I know that you're very connected. You have a very beautiful connection with God and you had to sort of fight for that, right? Like you had to find your voice and way in your own limiting constructs of abuse and other areas of your life where you, like with your marriage, and now you're in a healthy marriage and you have a healthy relationship with God. So what are some ways that you stay connected and lined up?
It was a journey. Like I remember early on, I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I pray? Right. Like just like the most basic of things. And now it's like this free flowing conversation. So for me, like I actually spend about an hour every morning in time with God, and that looks different every day. And so like sometimes I'm just praying, like there's something called praying in tongues. So sometimes I'm just praying in my prayer language. A lot of times I sit, like this morning, I was just sitting on the floor cross-legged and I was just, like there's this sweetness that comes. So I like give myself the space to sit and just invite God into that time. And he shows up. He shows up. Like sometimes it's just this warm, blissful, peaceful feeling in my chest. Or today was fun because it was like a cooling, refreshing almost throughout my legs and my upper chest and stuff like that. So like there's a tangible presence that will come. And it's almost like this weighty, beautiful, peaceful. There's like no other place in the world I'd rather be right now than this moment here, interacting with my creator. Like, it's just beautiful. But those come from giving space. Like, trying to rush through intimacy doesn't work. And I'm someone that has tasks and to-do lists and, agendas, and I've got to get this done. But I recognized a while ago that that rushing God wasn't the answer. And it's not to say that in a moment you can't connect in with your source, but giving time, just like a relationship with your spouse or your kids, you want to foster those moments of intimacy. You want to foster those times of just having conversations. Like, I actually have conversations with God. So I have like thousands of notes, and it was interesting. It started with me just writing pen and paper, right? Like that. Anyone that journals, pen and paper is like the most beautiful, wonderful thing that you could sit down and do, right? And I was writing, and I would write so fast just from like God, and it was really centered around early on. And, me having these, I used to call it listening prayer, where I'd asked God a question and I'd get these answers back, and then it just start flowing really quickly. And I used to write so quickly, it was so hard to catch up. And then, but I could only do it when I had my pen and my notebook, right? And so there was one time when God's like, well, I didn't have my pen and my notebook, and he wanted to talk to me and have me record it, right? And I'm like, well, I don't have my notebook. And he's like, use your phone. I'm like, what? Technology? No, that's going to be a barrier. Like, no. And he said, use your phone. And so I typed away on my phone. My little thumbs were having such a hard time keeping up. And then it progressed to voice dictation. Like, this was really interesting, where I would have these conversations, and I'd be getting these downloads of these beautiful, things for me to ponder, and for me speaking into my identity and who I am. And that love, a lot of the early writings that I had was all around identity and love, and just that relationship aspect, really solidifying that. And so I'd start voice dictating, and I would go so long that it would fry my phone. So I'd start to do funny things. So I learned I had to save it. And so I've got thousands of these notes. And so I gave myself the space to, sometimes I sing, and then I get into this singing, or sometimes I'm just saying thank you and I'm in gratitude. Like, it's just like a relationship with your husband or your kids. Like, you do different things, and they have different aspects of joy and deepening of that relationship that happen. And then there's also just going out into nature and just stopping at a flower and just being in awe of the flower or of the mountains, and just going, thank you. And then there's that connection in again, or like, I get the most ridiculous insights and answers to my questions out everywhere, like just all over the place. And so it's just, your mind starts to, just like when you first fall in love, and your mind is like, all you can think about is this new beautiful relationship, and everything is like a sign, and everything's a reinforcement of this beautiful relationship. And you're thinking of like how all the different ways you can love them and show them how much you care about them. It's the same kind of thing. Like, it starts to, that's the expanding part. Like forget about like, you must do X. Like, it's such a loving relationship. And so there's so many facets of what that looks like. And so that's just some of the things that I do.
I love it. It's like, I read somewhere that for people who are truly connected to God, their whole lives are a prayer.
Yeah. And a conversation.
It's not exactly. It's I guess it's a conversation in trust. Like, and building faith is knowing that it's there, that it's there for you, and you can lean on it, and it has your back. It being in the presence of God, and I think just having visited many cultures and talked to people of all world religions, like from Buddhism to Hinduism to Christianity to whatever, it's even the New Age movement. It's all about, how can I get still and notice how this force moves in my life, and how it's also so tender, right? It's so sweet. And I love how you put, it comes in as a tangible presence. I think and I think this is especially challenging for mothers with young children, because even though I'm 51, I still have a 5 and a 7-year-old. It's just how the universe decided to do this. 3 kids that have left for college or whatever. And then I have these 2 young ones. And I'm like, I feel myself going into resistance around, I can't meditate because I have kids. And then one day, and it took being in New Zealand for this, she calls herself a, I don't know what, she was connected to the sacred plants in New Zealand that were indigenous to New Zealand. And she was like a healer. And I was just crying to her. And I was like, and this was like, 4 years ago. So this would have been when the kids were really little, the two young ones. And she said, they're not interrupting your meditation. They're teaching you how to be in the presence of God because they embody it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I got chills everywhere. And I was like, oh, shoot. And recently our mutual friend, Dimple, she reminded me of the same. She said, they are like your spiritual masters. They're showing you. And recently, even just losing our dog, Molly, that we had for 13 years, a couple of weeks ago. And when she was here, she was like barking to go out and scratching the door, and it super bugged me. But then every time I would get this little feeling of like, but this dog is showing you to be here now, and what it's like to live every moment for the next bite, or to be in human proximity with other people. And it's like, oh shoot, I have looked past that. Yeah. And so when she died and she's not here, I'm like, oh, now I want to go get another dog. Cause I just like how they model that.
The reminder. Yeah.
Yeah. But no more kids, no more babies.
I agree that for you. Yeah. They're like, and it's like, such a great reminder, because I can be so task focused. Like, it's so fun. I'm such a contrast within myself, because I'm so heart focused and soul focused. And then I've got this very, task focused as well. But like kids and, puppies and stuff like that, such a great reminder of like, hey, let's have fun. Well, no, we got work to. No, like let's have ice cream before dinner. Like, yeah. And once in a while you go, yes, let's have ice cream before dinner. Not all the time.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's really what God wants for us, is sweetness and joy and connection and presence.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Alithia, for this discussion. I didn't know where we were going to go with it. I just felt like there's just what we needed to speak to, even just moving into this whole path of freedom.
Yes.
Breaking the chains, breaking bonds that have kept us down. And just thank you for being a presence and another witness for me, that, we have the power in us to claim truth. It's very sacred, and how it moves and manifests is very unique to each of us. And tell people where they can find you, for those who aren't reading the show notes. What's the best way to connect with you?
They can connect with me on Facebook, or I also have a podcast, the Life and Business Mastery podcast. And so they can find that on SoundCloud. Yeah,
you guys want to attach to her business brilliance. Those of you who are wanting to come into a path of entrepreneurial, she's probably too humble, like that she wouldn't brag about herself. But let me just tell you, she's done multiple $1 million mergers. And so you have a great brain for business. I was scrupulously taking notes last time we started with business and ended with God. And so I love that you bring both into the space, especially for women, how you model that. So
yeah, well, I've worked on multiple $1 million, but haven't closed them. But yeah, just great strategy. Love business, love marketing, and just have a great way to have conversations through that makes sense for business owners.
Yes. And you play in the space of thinking big around how can we still stay aligned in integrity and work with a lot of resources and people to bring that to be. So thank you.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Absolutely.
Thank you for being with us today. And again, just so grateful for what you brought to the space of this discussion on freedom.
Oh, it was such a pleasure, and just so good to talk through this with you. And, it expands my mind and my thinking as well. So I appreciate it.
Taking up courage and stepping into our own personal freedom is a brave path. And I greatly admire those who can step out into the unknown and what's been familiar to them and venture into the wilderness of not knowing. I think that is a great dare and a risk, if you will, that every human soul at some point needs to reckon with if they want to progress and expand. Alithia talked about expansiveness and how it's only in that expansiveness that we can truly access communion with the divine, with God, where the veil is thin, because everything right now is being unveiled. It's whether or not we choose to step into the old patterns and ways or find the authenticity that our souls crave by finding truth within and seeking those who encourage us to go within. I hope that this podcast can help embolden you and empower you to move into that path. It's not reckless. It's actually very responsible for your soul and needful to find your way. Thank you for listening, and we will talk next week on Women Seeking Wholeness.